and I need to put, I don't know, I have to put gallery view, then it will come. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm just arranging few things on my screen to make it more readily. Okay, so let's start. Measurement of personality type. So before we get into specific of personality type measurement, let's look at measurement in general, like how psychological characteristics are measured. And I would like this session to be a little more interactive, so I expect you to type a lot in your chat box. So, or speak up, because we are very few people. Like I think today there are 12 or 13 people. I don't know exact number, but 12 something. So we can talk, like we can have a more interactive conversation today. So I would like you to answer this question. What exactly is being measured when one measures a psychological characteristic? And contrast this with something like what exactly is measured when you measure temperature, or what exactly is measured when you measure weight, what exactly is measured when you measure volume of some liquid or some solid stuff. So, and think about this direct measurement, indirect measurement, or observed measurement and inferred measurement. So when we measure any psychological characteristic, what we are actually measuring? No, Kavita, we are not measuring anything subjective. We are not measuring what is happening inside you. We are measuring something which is happening outside of you, in other people. So if you are measuring even the feelings of other people, it's not subjective. Subjective means that when you are measuring something which is happening inside you, either through senses or through extrasensory perceptions, but it is happening inside you. Yeah, Satish wrote that it's measuring psychological characteristic is a derived process. So I think what you meant by derived, Satish, is that it's inferred. You see something and then you infer the presence of something which causes that thing that you see. Indira wrote behavior. Yeah. Behavior is quite a broad term, like, we can term as psychology as science of behavior. So, behavior is quite broad term. It fits, of course, when we measure psychological characteristic, what we are measuring is actually behavior, but then what kind of behavior? Measuring personality or character, the social presence that matters to you as a person. That makes it, I think, abstract for the purpose of measurement. Because each of this, like personality itself, is a constellation of different things. And character and personality, we don't know like how to really separate it. Diksha, you wrote a very interesting thing, and I would like to take it up later. Volume, weight, etc. is given. It does not change. Measuring psychological process might be changed after learning on learning. So it might change. Now the same way volume also changes. If I heat water,
BJ,
it becomes vapor and its volume will change.
Can someone mute? They're cooking or something. I don't know.
Yes, Harumi?
Oh, I was asking for mute, but I think that person muted.
Okay.
Okay, Vijay, I just wanted to say, when you are measuring some psychological characteristics, it is more on the individual biases can come, or individual perception. There are two different people can weigh it in different ways.
Might creep in between the thing that you want to measure and you know the thing through which you are measuring. Some things might creep in between, but here I want to be, you know, have a common understanding of first what exactly we are measuring when we are measuring any psychological characteristic. So one thing we need to be sure is that we are not measuring something subjective. We are not measuring something which is happening in one person. If it is not objective enough, it is not worth measuring. So if something which is happening uniquely only to you, there is no question or no point of making a measurement of that. But if the same thing happens independently of you in other people as well, then that was something measuring. So if intelligence is something which is only in you, like it exists only in the context of the person, without person it will not exist, then there is no point of measuring that. But if it is something which exists in different people at the same time, then you can measure it. So there are concepts which do not exist beyond the boundaries in which they are defined. For example, emotions. We always talk about emotions. Like, emotions don't exist if there is no relation. So, like, let's say measuring emotion without a relation, without a situation is impossible. You cannot measure emotion. So emotion exists in context of a relationship. Same does not apply for personality, because personality exists even if there is no one. So personality, your persona is always with you. You take it on, you take it off, that's another thing. So Satish wrote that we are measuring trait, measurement of what things, hence I have statement here. Okay, so I think there is enough, you know, intellectual stimulation to think about it. I would like to just summarize what all, you know, generally this is what I take up in my psychometric course, is that if we look at measurement as such, what is measurement? Measurement is giving number and defining, let's say, giving number to some observation as per some rule. That is measurement. So what you do in measurement is that you see something, and then you see a relationship between different degrees of that thing, and then you give a number and a rule for number to depict that relationship. So you know that there is something like temperature, you know something like high temperature and low temperature. Then what you do is that you find a way to assign number so that the number can indicate how high the temperature is or how low the temperature is. So this process is called measurement. Now, there are two ways to do the measurement. One is the direct measurement, that there is an object and there is nothing existing between the measurement of the object and the object itself. So I have this pen. If I want to measure its weight, then I just put the pen on a weighing scale and I put an, you know, let's say there is a balance type thing. I put on one side object, another side a standardized weight, and then I check when the balance is equal, and I say that you know, this pen is this much, and then I can have a number, numerical digit to represent that. That's direct measurement. When we measure length of a table, that is direct measurement, that there is nothing existing between that. You see the table and you use the instrument directly on it. Indirect measurement is that if you measure A to predict B or to measure B, what happens? It happens in the temperature measurement. when you measure temperature, what actually you are measuring is not the temperature. What you are measuring is the ascent or descent of the mercury in that tube. This is one way. There are other ways to measure temperature. Beyond certain boundary, you cannot measure ascent and descent of mercury. If you have to measure the temperature of sun, then you use entirely different method, entirely different technique. But the point here is that the temperature is a kind of objective reality, and you are not measuring it directly. There is no way to kind of access it directly. So you are measuring the impact of the temperature on an object in order to measure the temperature. That is indirect measurement. So in psychology, all measurements are indirect measurement. There is no way to directly measure anything except one, which is called competencies. What are competencies? Competencies are demonstrated behavior that leads to performance. So that is direct measurement, that you see the behavior and then you already have a whole scale of behavior and you just put it into proper category. So that is direct measurement. But except that, there is nothing in psychology which is a direct measurement. Everything is indirect. Then there are, again, you observe something and then you infer something else. So you kind of put that observation in a cause and consequence relationship. So you observe the consequence and you see the cause. This is called observed versus inferred. So if you observe a phenomenon, if you observe a behavior and you don't infer any cause, but you categorize that behavior, that is called observed measurement. And that's what you do when you do measurement of competencies, or sometimes measurement of 360 degree, like some concepts which are measured through 360 degree. So that is observed. But when you observe a behavior and through that behavior you infer, you imagine, or you estimate intelligence, personality, values. Best example is values. Like you watch people do certain actions, you make a catalog of those actions, and then through those actions you infer their values, you infer their preferences, you infer what they like more, what they like less, what they prefer, what they not prefer. So in psychological measurements, all measurements are inferred measurement. Julia, you wrote most personality measures use the self-report method. So we are measuring the individual's observation of themselves in relation to other and the world around them. Yeah, perfect. This is exactly what is inferred measurement. So you are, let's say when we ask people how sociable you think you are, and we never ask this direct question, we basically ask like, do you like meeting unknown people? So what we assume is that the theory is that if you say, yes, I like meeting unknown people, it means that your need for people connection is higher than those who say that I don't like meeting new people. So then this is inferred. So we are asking you self-report behavior which you have observed in yourself, and through that we are inferring something which is psychological and which is some objective. Like psychological doesn't mean only subjective. Psychological also means that it can be seen and verified independently of the instrument. So this is, I think it is important to note it here, is that one way to identify if something exists or not, when you don't see that thing, when you don't have any access, direct access to that thing, is to approach that thing from multiple perspectives. So if I want to know intelligence really exists or not, what I would need to do is that not one way of measuring intelligence, but I will have to find 5 different ways of measuring intelligence. And if my 5 different ways of measurement are leading me to make the same conclusion, then it means that I'm talking something which exists really. In psychology, it is called multi-trait, multi-method approach. And this is how you establish validity of a psychological concept which you don't see, which you don't perceive, which you have no direct access to, but you always infer, you always estimate. Okay, so with this background, Satish, you asked a question of whether isn't the self-appraisal route a proxy, because a better alternative could be longitudinal observation. Well, first thing I will, again, in behavior or in psychology, everything is relational. So I will say better for what? And self-appraisal is not always proxy, because if you want to know about my, let's say, level of abstractedness, or my tendency to abstract, let's say, general rule from the observation, it is more efficient and more productive to ask me 5 questions related to that in one shot, rather than observing me for 6 months. Because things which is internal to me and I have quite good access to that, those are better measured through self-report. Things about which the person himself or herself cannot be clear or don't have a direct access, those things are better measured in longitudinal. And there are certain things which don't exist in longitudinal. Like, for example, again, I would take the example of emotions and emotional reactions. They don't exist in longitudinal. So, like, if we have to make an emotional intelligence profile, it has to be have a snapshot in one moment. If we have to measure the impact of something, then we need to do a longitudinal observation. If we have to measure how different ways something unfolds itself, then we have to do a longitudinal measurement. So in regard to psychological type, for example, if you want to know what is my preference, you can do longitudinal measurement, and from that you can longitudinal observation, and from that you can infer it, but it will be far more efficient and therefore more preferable to have 10 good, nicely designed questions and validated questions to ask, rather than doing the longitudinal observation. So now, with this understanding, coming to the ways of measuring attitude and functions to determine psychological type. There are 2 ways theoretically available. One is as a dichotomy of preference. Like, 60% of the time you prefer this, 40% of the time you prefer this, in a very vague context. Or sometimes, you are on a crossroad, or let's say you want to go from point A to point B. There are 20 routes available, but at any given point in time, you will take only one route. You cannot walk on 20 routes at the same time. That's one. Second is that if you observe yourself over a long period of time, you will take one route more than the other. Even if all the routes are having exactly equal distance, you will have more familiarity, more comfort, more liking towards one route than the other. So this is what called dichotomy of preferences. If you put that, reduce that route to 2. So this is how most psychological type questionnaires are measuring, is that they try to understand whether you prefer more extroversion or introversion, whether you prefer more sensing or intuition. The second idea about measuring type is to measure the strength of the functions. And through the strength, you know that if some function has been stronger than the other, it means that that function will have stronger, more impact on the behavior and the trait, building the trait of the person than the other. Now, this approach some people have tried, but till now I'm not aware of any robust instrument to do that. It's been 5 years I'm working on that, to measure all 8 functions. And I think by 2021 or beginning 22, I will be able to have a very robust and reliable measurement of all 8 psychological functions in conscious domain. Because for unconscious, it's very difficult to have a proper measurement, and whatever measurement will be, that it will be subject to a lot of clinical interpretation of it associated with it. But I think by 2021, I will have a very good, robust assessment of psychological functions, strength of psychological functions. So today, Harumi, you said measures PTI does that. I think Pierman is also saying that its new instrument does that. I have to look at that. Thank you. If it will be possible for you to send me an email or a link to that, I would love to study, because if somebody is doing something, I can collaborate with that person. I have been like seriously working. It's been like more time than doing a PhD on that. So
I have majors PTI certification, and it will give percentages of awareness of the functions. And then I've never taken Pierman, but he released his instrument I think last year, and he's saying that he does go into that, the functions.
Okay, yeah. What I'm focusing here is actually more than the awareness of the function in terms of, because that goes to the Myers-Briggs idea of clarity, is that are you in touch with those functions and how much you have seen, which gives an indirect way of measuring the strength. But I wanted to have a very quantified, objective way of measuring it. There is a book also, somebody published that quantification of Jungian functions. I have that book and I read it, but I found it more like, speculative, theoretical presentation rather than having any practical significance. One way I have found is that if I use multiple methods, like for example, introverted intuition cannot be measured by asking questions. Self-report is not enough for measuring introverted intuition. So if I make people listen some piece of music and I ask question related to that, that is far better than in measuring that introverted intuition. Same goes for introverted sensing also. So if I give different sensory input and ask self-report on that, so it's basically giving input and then asking for self-report, maybe that will. So we are experimenting a lot with that. We'll see how it goes. Then let's have a quick overview of the major tests which are available for measuring psychological type. And of course, the most popular of all of them is MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which is, by the way, it's a registered trademark of Myers-Briggs. So whenever, now it is called Myers-Briggs Company, because in the beginning, Myers-Briggs sold this to an APT, then APT sold it to CPP, and then CPP, California Psychological Press. And then they bought that whole CPP and created a company called Myers-Briggs Company. So now it is called Myers-Briggs Company. So it is a test by them. It measures preferences. So what it does is that it asks you dichotomous question, whether, deciding something, you like to follow a logical, rational argument, or you would like to follow the subjective values. So while deciding to distribute some benefit, you look at logical way of how it should be done, or you look at the needs of the people in that environment and your values associated with that. So it's basically either this or that. And because of that, it was criticized a lot because it tries to kind of force fit. And then they became mad, those people who were doing the validation and all. And they started kind of answering all kind of criticism. And they created manual, which is this big, but 80% of that is crap. Or there is nothing which is significant in that. It's like full of ridiculous statistical numbers. Then another tool is Keirsey temperament sorter, which is developed by another psychologist called Keirsey. He was interested in Hippocrates' way of looking at psychological type and classifying. It's very interesting that on Jungian idea, two people were working at the same time. And in fact, it worked like this. They were not aware of Jung. They were working on classification of people, Myers and Briggs and David Keirsey. What happened is that one day they met and they exchanged their notes. They shared their ideas. And they found that they were roughly approaching the same thing from different perspectives. And they came across Jung after some time, Jung. And then they found something which is like far more robust than they were thinking. So they linked their idea with Jung's theory. And that's how these two things developed independently, Keirsey and Myers-Briggs type indicator. When I started studying them, I personally preferred more Keirsey's way because I find it more psychological. I did not like the way Myers and Briggs put it, because I saw that they were trivializing things in the sense that they were making it too much kind of trivial, or too much they were trying to simplify it, oversimplify it. And there are some psychological things that you need not to oversimplify. And in fact, oversimplification is not going to help anybody in that process. If something is complex, it is complex, like, deal with it. And then there is another tool called Golden Personality Type Profiler. It has those, it is developed by a guy called Golden, and he's still alive and very much present on LinkedIn. And I think we are also friends on LinkedIn. We exchange some notes. He added a fifth dimension in that dichotomy. So he uses our extroversion, introversion, sensing, intuition. He gives them different name. So he has created his own typology with different name, but it's only the labeling is different and there is nothing else different. And then he added a fifth dichotomy in that, whether you are tense or calm. The way Myers and Briggs, especially Isabel Myers, added the dichotomy of judging or perceiving, in the same way he added one more, tense and calm, which basically takes into account the negative emotionality, and then it explains certain more things. It's a quite good instrument, because this person has basically tried to kind of put one more perspective in that. Then there is PTI Pro. It is not known all over the world because it was developed by me and it's mostly used in India. But in India, I believe that it is used more than MBTI, because I don't know the exact figures of MBTI, because they are my kind of I don't consider them as my competitor, and neither I don't think they know that I exist. But if I look at the numbers of MBTI is available in India through resellers only. If I look at the total turnover of those resellers, and I see that, and there is only one distributor of MBTI. So if I look at him, Anahat, and their turnover of what they have sold, because they have to report it to the registrar of companies every year. From that, if I factor out how much will be the cost of this, then I see that they are like, 1/3 of what PTI Pro is used. PTI Pro is taken by almost like 45 to 48,000 people every year. So it's a test which is developed by me. And if you are interested in have a look at the manual and the brochure, I will be happy to send it to you sometime later maybe. So these are 4 tests which you have an option to if you are using test. But then I would like to put some pointers, and these pointers are basically based on my experience. So it will be kind of thank you, Julia. You said that you're interested in the test. Thank you very much. Disk is used. Gauri. Disk is another breed altogether. because it's based on a different theory, it's based on different model, and it talks about something very, very different. It's very surface level thing. It's like the way I put it is, it's like it's a stand-up comedian of the world of psychological testing. That's what DISC is. It's fun, it's nice, but then sometimes it appears philosophical, just like stand-up comedians, but then sometimes it also impacts some people very highly. But if you go and analyze and try to find something, some psychological truth there, or something, some robust concept, nothing is there. It's based on Marston's theory of emotions of normal people. It takes into account only 2 dimensions of personalities trait, surface level. One is vigilance, how much you are, let's say, accepting and trustful or vengeful to the situation which is surrounding you. And number 2, how much self-confidence you have. So confidence in self versus trust or mistrust in outside environment, or what DISC people call it, support from outside environment. That dichotomy, if you put that confidence like that, and then trust or mistrust, you get 4 boxes, and 1 box is D, another is I, another is X, and the 4th is C. Holland theory and Jung we'll talk about later sometime. So some consideration for us as a test user, like first thing, and I wanted to present it point by point, but it's all together. So I let you read for like 2 minutes, all of this, and then I will take it point by point and we'll talk about it. And while reading, if you get any question, please put it in the chat box. All right, so I guess that you have read this slide, the text on the slide. So basically, I have tried to kind of capture quickly or address quickly 3 issues, basically, where to get authentic information on the test, because, and it basically matters for all psychometric tests. There are 2 sources of information on a psychological test, any psychological test. One is what the test developer tells you. It's like a seller telling you about the, features or what is available in the product. And another is that what a third party independent reviewer tells you. And I think that this is my opinion. This is not like a, objective truth, but this is what I have found useful, and my opinion is that you take information from both the sources and you compare stuff, and then you see whether it is useful for your objective or not. So I always, whenever I use a test, I always go through the manual. I read everything that they have to say, but I don't trust a single damn thing. I have to verify everything. Otherwise, I have found many a times that test developers, because most times developers are also the sellers, so they lie because they have some vested interest in lying that, and that's okay. I can understand their position, but then I have to have my own way to verify things. So if somebody says that, look, the reliability of my test is 0.98, I have to first ask, okay, which kind of reliability? Is it test retest? Is it internal consistency, or is it classification consistency? What it is? And then I see on what population it was estimated and how it was estimated. And then is there any way for me to verify it? So reliability, thankfully, is a very easy thing to verify. What I do is that I get like 10, 15 people who I know quite well. I give them the test. After 15 days, I give them the test again. And of course, I pay them for taking that test in form of I invite them to party, and we have a drink together, and I say, okay, here is what I'm doing. Would you be interested? So something like that. And then if I see that they claim that it's 0.98, but in my observation of those 10, 12 people, their personality type has not changed in those few days. If I see there is a big difference in the score, in the type, then it means that whatever they are claiming is at least not applicable in my situation. So it is not something which is a universal claim which I can accept, but it is something maybe which is more contextual. And then the second, and I think more efficient source, is that peer review done by the professional accrediting bodies. Like you have BPS in UK, British Psychological Society. You have bureaus in US, and you have IIBP in India, which has an accreditation committee on psychometric testing. And it has published, if you go to IIBP website, you will see the test reviews, which is basically, most of them are BPS test reviews. But you have a authentic third-party source of information to check on the claims that a test developer does. And most test developers actually don't even have a manual. Especially that's true about India, because we don't have a regulation, a legal binding on test developers to put a manual to get it verified somewhere else before publishing. So people here publish just like they take questionnaire from somewhere, and then they collect some data sometimes, and then they publish it as a test. So these are two sources of information that you can look at and verify. Then this few basic things to do before using any test is, and this is again based on my experience, and I'm sharing it as a fellow professional, is that familiarize yourself with the theory or the construct very well of what the test is measuring. So try to understand the development of the idea, development of that theory, how it has been developed, for what it has been developed, what it predicts, what it works and what it doesn't predict. So for example, psychological type was not designed to predict performance. It is a theory which is not for predicting performance. It is a theory which is not for doing selection. What it was designed for, or what it is useful for, is understanding self and understanding others. And if that understanding leads to something else, that's like, good, or that's its own problem. What it is designed for is creating that understanding. And in that way, it's a very robust theory. But if you try to, have a performance prediction model based on MBTI or based on psychological type scores, that is like, misusing the test or misusing the theory. So same way, like each theory is developed in some context and for some purpose. So be always familiar with the context and purpose of the theory. And with regard to the tool, I always say this statement, that if you cannot use a theory without a test, don't use the test. So, and it's very, very funny, is that if I can use a theory without a test, then why should I use test? Like it's as simple as that. So I use test because I don't know much about the theory. So test gives me, and test report gives me some more information to get into that. So this is a misplaced notion as per me, because what happens is that each test relies heavily on its underlying psychological construct to give you interpretation, and those constructs are generally deeper than what a computerized report can give you. So be familiar too much. So then what's the point of using test if you can use the theory without a test? The whole point of using a test is that it reduces the time that you need in order to do the assessment. So without, let's say, without test, it will take you maybe a couple days to do all that assessment. With test, you can do it in 20 minutes. So that's the advantage. Second thing is that you always check the language and cultural adaptation, because many a times the words which are used in the questionnaire that you are using are having very different meaning from the culture in which they were originally developed to the culture where you are planning to use them. I will give a couple examples. Like there is one word called cool. Now cool, now in most places, is regarded as something which is a person who is kind of accepting and in line with whatever is modern, whatever is current, whatever is in vogue. The person is in line, attuned with that. That person is cool. A person who is going with the trend. Now, in 60s or in 70s also, the word cool was somebody who is socially aloof. For people who English is a second language, this meaning still exists. If you go to dictionary, this meaning still exists. And people who have learned English as a second language and do not belong to that urban culture where cool means trendy, for them cool means being socially distant. And since the same word has different meaning, it will give different result. Harumi, I'll come to your question. Check for language and cultural adaptation, and then check for validity evidence in targeted population where you are using the test. So each test is designed for a purpose, and it is designed on a particular construct. So validity means that to what extent it is related to its purpose, and to what extent it is related to its construct. So if a test says that it measures the clarity of preference, so to what extent it measures the clarity of preference, and is the concept of clarity of preference even exist in the theory on which the test is claimed to be based at. If a test is measuring strength of functions, then what is strength of the function as per the test, and what are the implications of strength of function in different areas of life. So for example, can we find some group of people who are believed to have higher strength in introverted thinking than others? And when we look at that, we say, yes, there are a group of people who are supposed to be high in introverted thinking. They're all the people who work with structure and analysis of ideas. So all the analysts, all the statisticians, all the mathematicians, all the scientists, they are supposed to have highly developed introverted thinking. So if they are scoring higher on that test than a normal population, it means that there is an evidence of validity. So you need to check that evidence, how much evidence of validity is presented at two levels. One is about the idea that the test is measuring, and second is that what is the impact of that idea and how much test score is related to the measurement of that impact in real life. And then whatever test satisfy your conditions most, then you use that test. This is the kind of criteria that I use while selecting a test. So it may not be the criteria which I discard is popularity, like how if other people are doing that or not. Second, also criteria I discard, which is familiarity, means whether people around me are using it or not. That those two I don't consider as criteria. I consider criteria of only this, whether it has reliable enough. It is, most importantly, if it is connecting to, if the statements in the questionnaire make sense same way in the targeted population where I'm using, because that's very important. If you get that wrong, then the whole measurement will go wrong. Now, Harumi, I'll come to your question. Yeah, Harumi, I also think, with your permission, I'm going to read this question. Yeah, maybe. Okay. I'm not thrilled with MBTI either, but PTI proven, I just looked it up. I'm seeing that you also start with assessing 4-letter type. Yes, yeah, that's true. So then what is the reason for your bias against MBTI? I'm just trying to understand, as I think 4-letter typology is the best way to start, help people understand. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I also think that the 4-letter typology is the best way. And that's the only reason I respect Myers and Briggs, despite of all the bad things they have done. The source of my bias is that they took a concept, they took a name of the person. In fact, in the manual, they said, objectively, they have written that they met Jung and Jung encouraged them. Now, there is one journalist who investigated that claim, and she has reported, there is a book on that also. It's called What is Your Type? It's the history of Myers and Briggs. Please mute yourself. If you are not speaking, then keep your microphone muted. Otherwise, it disturbs other people. Yeah. So there is. I have to. Okay. Okay, just let me do something about it. Otherwise, it will not be.
Can I say something really quickly while you're doing the mic thing? Okay. The thing with Isabel Myers, I mean, so I'm not a total fan of MBTI. I'm not trying to advocate for them, but I know that Isabel Myers, she was very concerned about type development, not type development. And so step 3, I am not certified in step 3, MBTI step 3, but that's really measuring about development, not just using your own type, stuck in your own type. And one of her life goals and her mission was to find out her own values. That's just talking about introverted feeling, but how can I express what is valuable for me? Not just to push her own values on people, but it was really growing her own introverted thinking, which is her lowest function. In order, so I really hear a lot from Isabel Myers. It's not just this is my type, that's it. I think later marketing, they might have messed up a lot of the original intent. I hear what you're saying about how.
Yeah, so I think my bias comes from that because when I started using, I was fascinated by it. So that's why I bought all the books which were published. I contacted as many people as I could have, and I discussed everything what was possible for me to discuss at that time. So I read each and every book and on that, and also I did a lot of observation in that. What the basis of my bias is basically number one is that they lie, and it's a very strong value for me. Is that if someone is lying, I don't have any problem with people lying, and I think lies are useful at some level. Like I play magic tricks with my children, and that is basically a kind of lying, but then it is done with a purpose to just create some fun. But lying factually is that Jung encouraged me to go into that line. When Jung, there is a recorded history that Jung actively avoided you. There is not a single picture of Myers and Briggs with Jung in a same frame, because he actively never appeared. And he was alive at that time. It's not like he was dead. When they were working, he was alive. And they tried to meet him a couple times. That's one. So it's basically, you know, missing of some integrity part. But that is a strong factor for me as a personal, having a personal bias. But other than that, there are certain theoretical stuff. Number one, they try to trivialize. So they focus more on the, you know, making that dichotomy clear. And they gave an idea of clarity of preference. This is their idea, clarity of preference. With no clear direction or no clear clue of how it is going to play. So if a person, let's say, gets the highest score on extroversion in comparison to introversion. So let's say introversion is 0, extroversion is 32. That's the highest possible in that. Now, what does it mean? Does it mean that the person extroverts 100% of the time? Does it mean the person is very clear whether he is not introverted and extroverted person? What does it mean? They did not talk about that meaning at all. What they did, they created 16 templates, and then they started talking about that in general, this is what happened, that's what happens, and things like that. Then this is also okay, like, you know, we don't know everything. But then they went into a direction when they put step 2, then what they did, they brought in big 5 from a back door and put that into MBTI. So all the big 5 traits are put in 4 categories of 5 each under each function. So all those like initiating, receptive, this and that. And they say that it's no more dichotomous, it is continuous. So what essentially they are measuring is traits. But rather than acknowledging that personality type leads to certain trait, and this is the limits of measuring personality type, they tried to kind of put big 5 in the back door in their test, purely from, I don't know, maybe marketing purpose. This also I considered as a dishonesty thing, because if you are taking another theory and putting into your theory, recognize that and do it properly. Thirdly, they leave people like those people who are trained, and in my workshops, I think 20% people are already trained and certified by Myers, you know, in MBTI. So until now, I think I have, you know, done psychometric workshop with more than 1,000 people. Out of that, 200 plus are MBTI certified people. And in a country like India, it is a huge number where MBTI is not very popular in terms of uses. In terms of academics, it's very popular because everybody who has done a course in MBA, HR, or Master in Psychology knows about MBTI because it is taught in the curriculum.
Vijay, can I
so these are, I think, the sources of my bias against them.
Can I respond to the thing about the lying?
I would be interested in knowing about this step 3 because I have not heard about it.
Yeah, only certain people. I applied for it, but I was rejected. You have to have like a clinical psychology degree. But can I respond really quickly to the thing about lying?
He have been rejected because he did not have a clinical psychology degree.
Yeah.
If Carl Jung would have applied to level 3 course with the Myers-Briggs company, he would have been rejected.
Sorry, I don't know what the exact, I don't remember the
no, like you said you applied for level 3.
Yes.
And they did not accept your application, saying that you don't have a clinical psychology degree.
Yes, but I don't remember if that was the exact qualification. It might have been some other qualification.
With that logic, Carl Jung did not have a clinical psychology degree.
Sure.
So but he was a medical doctor.
But can I respond to what you were saying about lying?
Yes, please.
Because this is what I with the lower functions, when the function is so, our usage of the lower functions is so low that we're not aware that we're lying. I'll give you an example. My lower function is introverted sensing.
Mm-hmm.
I forget how long something took me because my awareness of time is so low. For example, something took me 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
but it took a lot of time and frustration for me. So I might exaggerate, and I'm not lying about this. I might exaggerate and say like, it took me like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
the awareness is so low. So
Yeah.
Myers had low introverted thinking. And so I could see her lying with words, facts, even though she's not aware it's a lie. And my daughter is also same type as Myers. I do see her lying, but it's so real for her that she's not lying because her feelings are genuine. Does that do you hear what I'm saying? So
yeah, I can totally relate to that, because actually there are 2 members in my family are like that.
Yeah. So then for me,
it
for
makes
my
me,
husband,
when I hear you, it makes a lot of sense that people who have low developed introverted thinking,
yes,
they might not focus their attention on the purity of idea, for example.
yes, they might not be aware. Like they said something one day, next day they say something completely different. It's because of low introverted thinking. On the other hand, though, people with high introverted thinking, I find them lying a lot about their feelings because they're not really aware of what they're feeling exactly.
Yeah.
Or their feelings change.
So you see clearly that there is a feeling A, and they are confused whether it is A or B. Sometimes they say A, sometimes they say B, sometimes they say C, something like that, right?
Yeah, or they forget what they just said. Like you told me that you didn't like her, now you like her, things like that with low introverted feeling. So I think that might have been going on as well, instead of like lying.
Yeah. No, but I like, when I put things objectively, I just evaluate fact by fact. Okay, whether it is you said this, is this correct? First of all, I ask that can it be verified objectively? So if you say I met Vijay Pandey in person, it can be verified, whether you met me as person or not. If you say I went to Paris in June, it can be very, very much objectively verified whether you went to Paris in June or not. But then you could be in your head that, okay, you went to Paris not physically but mentally. You lived in Paris mentally in June. So yeah, I see those points. And another thing is that why I don't use it, or why I decided to even develop PTI Pro, for example, is that to have those things clarified for me first, and also for people who were working with me in psychological types, because we were facing a roadblock, and we were thinking that we are competent enough to develop a new test. So we developed it. And the interpretation goes different. And it starts with 4-letter type, and I think that's the best way to start. But the interpretation goes very, very different. For example, we don't consider that if you have exact same score on thinking, feeling, we don't consider it as lack of clarity. Not at all. It is not lack of clarity. So we consider always 2 hypotheses to be verified, and this is the feedback that we give in the report. Not like, if you have this, you could have that, not like that. Very specific that you have an equal score on thinking and feeling. So here are 2 possibilities, and here are ways to clarify it or get into it and understand it for you. So that's the difference.
Okay, sorry everyone and Vijay for making this my personal session. I'm very sorry for that.
No, that's okay. Like,
but, yes.
It's like the more common thing are anyway mostly covered. So now I will just take like 2-3 minutes to cover this, and we will close it today. We'll discuss tomorrow the remaining, and that will be not tomorrow, Monday, and that will be the last session on this, in which it will be only on interpretation. So few things to take care while using the test, and I'm here talking about specifically about personality type, and in general about any test, is that you keep a logbook, make hypothesis, and test your hypothesis, and then discard the unproven hypothesis. So for example, if you are using, let's say, a personal psychological type test, and you see the score, the difference score between extroversion and introversion is 3, 4, 5, you make hypotheses like people who have a differentiation of 2 would have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. And in your session, in your feedback session, you ask whether you have this or that, and then you make a tally, discard all other things. Similar people must have done that and published in research. Read those things. This way you will develop a deeper understanding into the functioning of that theory, and this is what is going to give you more insight and more going to make you more useful for the people for you do the test. And then allow your clients to talk most of the time, and try to kind of educate the person not on let's say not on the theory as such, but for the common terms. For example, when you talk about feeling, you have a meaning of it, like feeling in context of psychological type. When the person talks about feeling, it has a different meaning. So try to share and have a common meaning. Otherwise, most of the time it is like, people are using the same word, but they mean different things. So then that creates a problem. And also have a peer group where you can discuss stuff, where you can share information, because it's always better if we share. We all learn when we share. And most importantly, and for an extroverted person like me, it's a kind of very strong thing to take care of, is that maintain the privacy of the candidate. So what I do is that even in my logbook, I don't write the name of the candidate with who I'm interacting. So I always write 38-year-old female or 28-year-old male, something like that. So that way it makes more sense. Sometimes if I see that there is some important information that has to be written, so I write like male from this area, that area. This one is also important. I want to just cover it for interpretation. And tomorrow we'll talk, not tomorrow, in the next session, we will talk about in detail about how to go about interpreting. I'm not going to take one type at a time or one function at a time and go detail, because that will be like a 3-month course. So, but I will definitely.
Vijay, I've given you a message. Can you just see if that's possible?
Your message, Indira, how to develop inferior function. I will put that why to develop inferior function. Like it has been inferior for a reason. So unless and until you find your why to develop that, I would not suggest even looking at inferior function. So because maybe you have a need to develop that because you are stuck in the wrong job, so it's better to change the job rather than taking the arduous task of developing inferior function. Because what happens is that when you put something from unconscious to conscious, you change something in your structure, and once it is changed, you cannot redo, you cannot go back and put it again into unconscious. So what will happen is that it's not always very, self-development is a very highly romanticized idea. Is that we have to develop, we have to grow. Why to grow? Why to develop? Understanding is important. That I can agree. Is that, being biased and knowing about your bias is far better than being biased and being driven about with your bias, not being aware of your bias. But then why to remove the bias? Because if you remove the bias, you will develop another kind of bias. So if you make your inferior function as your primary function, or even, to auxiliary function, then something else will become, the tertiary and fourth. And then it will have its consequences. So what we need to focus on is understanding first why to develop. In some situations, it is important to develop because it is interfering with your day-to-day functioning. It is leading you to neurosis. Then, of course, it is necessary to develop that in order to get rid of your neurosis, in order to get rid of your pain. But just because it is there and it is inferior, it has to be developed, it will create little more problem. So I'll with that, I'll maybe tomorrow or in the next session, I will cover it in 15 minutes, a little more detail. Okay. Yes, yes, Indira, I'll share with you that interplay of functions. Yes. So some common pitfalls which I have observed in myself and in people I train about on psychological types is that mistaking preference for behavior. If I prefer extroversion or if I prefer sensing, it does not mean that my behavior will be always sensing type. Behavior, always remember that there is a big thing which stands between behavior and preference, and that is the environment, that is the situation. So preference is kind of, it creates some kind of traits, but preference is not directly related to behavior. So many a times when we see a high, let's say, a high E score, we always, oh my god, it to itna bada extrovert. Okay, sorry for using Hindi. So sometimes we say that, okay, this is so strong, extrovert, and then therefore the behavior, all the extroversion behavior we just impose on the candidate, which will not be true. So this is one pitfall to avoid. Then again, the second pitfall is mistaking frequency for intensity. So how often I do it does not indicate how good I am or how strong I am in doing that. So someone could do something more often in the wrong way and the person will still be wrong. Or someone basically exercises, let's say exercises with less weight than it is required to develop the muscle. You keep on exercising your whole life and you will not develop strength because you are not using enough weight. So we have to look at what we are really talking about, frequency or intensity, and not confuse between the two. So that happens when we talk about feeling, and when we talk about feeling and thinking basically, and when we talk about sensing and intuition. So
there's this NLP coach. He says that it's a very wrong notion that practice makes you perfect. It's actually practice makes you permanent, or makes you move towards permanence, but it does not make you perfect.
Yeah, because the notion of perfect is also debatable. Like perfect in what sense is it?
I mean, in terms of it does not make you good at the second part. That doesn't mean how good you are.
What you will be good at is doing things wrong. That's all. It will not make you better. So for being better, there has to be more thing than just practice. Another mistaking input for output or cause for effect. And in all psychological things, it's very much intriguing that psychological type is input, it's not output. So what happens is that the way it works is that your psychological functioning creates your trait. So trait is the output of your psychological functioning. Then your trait interacts with the environment and creates the behavior. Then your behavior has an impact on some things, and it creates some result or performance. That performance leads to some result or some outcome. So in that process, we need to be very sure of which level we are operating at. So when you are working on psychological types, you are operating at the level of at the deeper level, which basically at the level of psychological functioning, to be specific. And it does not mean that if the person has high score on introverted thinking, let's say, it does not mean that the person would be good at introverted thinking. Whether the person will be good at introverted thinking or not, that you have to verify independently of the score. Generally, there is a correlation that those as a group, those who are high score on that, they exercise it more, and some of them develop better. So overall, the group score goes better. And then mistaking probability for predictability. This is also one big mistake that we do. Probability is basically a ratio. So when we say that there is 20% chances of rain today, what it means that in this kind of weather, in this kind of climatic condition, in the past, 20% of the time it has rained and 80% of the time it has not rained. So when we talk about probability, we are talking about that ratio. When we say that there is 5% of probability of corona, you getting infected with corona, what it means is that in a general population, at this point in time, 5% people are infected. That's what it means, probability. Now, predictability has a cause and effect. So if you have 5% probability of infection from corona, it doesn't mean that, you know, in the long run, you will be impacted by the corona. So don't confuse it with that. And it happens a lot when we interpret the test scores on psychological type, is that when it talks about probability, then we think it as in terms of predictability. It says that, okay, people who have ESTJ profile, they enjoy selling, they enjoy being in sales, and 80% of probability is that they will be in sale. It means that 80% of the sales people are ESTJ. Okay, it does not mean that you know, if you are an ESTJ, you have 80% chance of getting there. It's the other way around, the logic. So it is important to understand that that part is that probability is not predictability. Okay. So that's all I wanted to cover today. Again, as usual, we overshot. Tomorrow we will talk about, I can show you what we'll talk, so that you are, when to use personality type test, how to use personality type test. Yeah. So tomorrow I will talk about all these lenses. Okay. Like how you can, you know, put things together and have a meaning which is not present in one thing. So for example, how to look at functions, ST, SF, NT, NF, like that. So in the next session, which will be on Monday, and not exactly tomorrow, but our tomorrow, which is Monday, we will talk about this, and we'll talk about some. Yes, Padmini, before I close, you can ask the question. Yeah.
Thank you. So my child, so she's in grade 6. A couple of times she comes back to me saying, this moment, this moment I have experienced before. I thought I know it already. So what is that sensing or intuition, or what is that?
It is just that there are certain things which were in the unconscious domain. They suddenly became conscious. Means they came into her awareness, and she's trying to make a sense of it. In like there is a word for that, we call it deja vu. And generally, with those people who it happens more, it gives an indication that they have not completely lost the access to their unconscious, but it is the access, the route to unconscious is quite not completely destroyed in them.
I didn't get that, sorry.
So it's like in the first session, I talked about the awareness and what is conscious, what is not conscious.
Yeah.
So people who get this kind of feeling, deja vu feeling, that I have been here, what is being said, I have heard it before. All this is because from the unconscious, something had just came up in the consciousness,
Okay.
the awareness.
Okay.
And then the person suddenly becomes aware of it. And when something suddenly comes, you first reaction of the ego is that trying to make a sense of it. Because ego cannot live without making sense. Okay. So it has to make a sense. And the easiest way to make a sense is to put it into something which is happening now. So then it connects. It might be kind of, something related to the person's, person's psyche, or something just plain illusion, or some kind of, chemical locha in the brain. But then it depends upon how much it is. If it is going in a normal way, it should be listened to and it should be adhered to. Like you should not reject. You should pay a heed, pay a listening ear to that.
Okay.
And
It's just plain.
it is
Like she says,
interfering with the normal functioning, then it needs to be dealt with. That's all.
huh. No, it's very very
Okay.
somebody's on
that's
it.
that's quite.
Okay. Mm. Okay, so it's very plain. She says like this teacher has never taught me, but I had an image where she was telling me something, and right now it happened. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's called deja vu feeling. Yes.
Okay, okay. Another one, Vijay. So in office, while I'm working, sometimes I feel like I'm not going to send. I don't want to send this mail right now, but the timelines are there. I have to send it right now, but my mind says no, 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 and then. But then I'm bound to send it, and then it bounces back like I shouldn't have sent it. I should have waited for a little while. Same thing happens. I don't want to go to this meeting today, but I can't help it.